as we discuss navigating the ICH E6R3 tools and resources that Transcelerate members have put together. My name is Patrice Wright, and I'm going to be your facilitator for today. Next slide, Grace. I'm going to review some ground rules. We want to make sure that this discussion is helpful and we can answer as many of your questions as possible. But we have some ground rules that we need to talk about. Your participation here is voluntary, as is using all of the solutions that we will discuss today. The responsibility for compliance is up to you and your company, as well as any other additional laws, regulations that may be applicable. You don't have to identify yourself today. If you ask a question, you don't have to do that. Things that we ask you not to discuss or raise questions about, what vendors, sites, CROs you may be using or not using, any issues you have with those suppliers, your long-term development plans, or anything related to cost and pricing. And we will not be able to answer many of those questions related to those topics. In addition, what member companies may or may not be using these assets or tools. It may be offered voluntarily, but we cannot answer questions about that. Next slide. Those of you that are long-term Transcelerators, welcome again. Thank you for coming back. If you are new to Transcelerate, we are a non-for-profit entity, and we were created to really foster collaboration to be able to find solutions that are going to deliver efficient and effective, high-quality medicines to patients. Next slide. Transcelerate is a member-driven company, and our members are pharmaceutical companies or any other organizations developed in pharmaceutical research and development that engage in the innovation, discovery, development, and manufacturing of new medicines. These members are individuals, these members offer up individuals that are experts in whatever area we tend to be working in that are going to dedicate their time to Transcelerate to identify specific issues and challenges and design practical solutions that can help address those challenges. So you are going to be hearing from today, next slide, Grace, some representatives of those member companies who have worked hard over the past few years looking at the ICH E6 and the new requirements that are going to be coming in the guidelines. Today we have with us Madeleine Whitehead from Roche, Tashan Mistree from GSK, Shilpa Lewandowski from AstraZeneca, and Arlene Lee from Medidata, who is representing ACRO today, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. We also have additional guest speakers, Rebecca Stanbrook from Novartis and Dave Nickerson from EMD Serono. And I've been so honored to be able to work with these experts over the past few years. Next slide. So I mentioned ACRO. As part of this effort, Transcelerate worked with the Association of Clinical Research Organizations, which I'll be referring to as ACRO in the rest of the presentation, to deliver adoption tools and solutions in the risk management and data governance focus areas, which we will be talking about in a few minutes. Next slide. What we're going to do today, we're going to go through a bit of an executive summary. We're going to talk about the importance of ICH E6 and R1 working together. We're going to take a deeper dive into what's new in ICH E6 R3. And we're going to demonstrate a little bit how some of these tools that we've delivered are going to work. And then if we have time, which I think we will, we're going to take some of your questions. Next slide. A little bit of logistics. I think that's the next slide. You're going to see in your on the screen here and on your view, you have two buttons for the participants. There's a question button. If you want to ask a question, please insert it there. And if there's a handout, there is a handout that we would like you to be able to access at the end of the presentation. It's a takeaway for you to be able to see the work that we've done. Just a reminder, we're going to be recording this session and that you will be muted. So the only way that you're going to be able to ask questions is by using the question button. Next slide. We received a number of questions as you were registering for the meeting today. And we want to thank you for all of those. They helped us sort of create the content that we're going to be addressing today. So your interest is appreciated. If thinking about the scope that we talked about earlier and the things that we can't do in our ground rules, we're going to adhere to those ground rules. So we may not be able to answer some of your specific questions, okay? We will be presenting some theoretical case studies to demonstrate context for the usefulness of the solutions, but we do not have yet specific examples or real-life case studies that we can discuss. We may be looking at in the future and sharing some of that as the work progresses, if we have some value stories, if that's possible, but we don't have that for today. Specific documentation about your company processes, we're not going to cover. Again, that's related to your company and your specific details, and they're going to vary across member companies. So we're not going to take any of questions for that. And then the last thing is that each member company is responsible for your own compliance. So we're not really necessarily going to be able to tell you how you may or may not be compliant. Next slide. I think we can talk about this in a little bit. Next slide. When we were reviewing the registration, we asked you what you knew about ICH E6, and we have a lot of people that registered for the webinar, and we know that many of those people listen to it later. So if you can let us know, the people who are here right now, your level of expertise and what you know, that's going to be very helpful. For those of you that have not read it yet, when you get the slides after the meeting, on the very first slide, there is a link that will take you right there to the actual guidelines so that you can make sure you know you're reading the right thing. Okay, so we're going to see, sorry about the delay, guys. We're going to take a look at the answers, I think. All right, well, if not. So here we go. We look like we're sort of in the early adoption phase where we've either identified the changes or not really even looked at the guideline yet. There are a few of you looking for implementation tools. Well, you're in the right place. And a few of you are already implementing the changes, and hopefully what we're going to share today will be able to help you progress with that work. So I am now going to turn it over to Dave. I believe I'm turning it over to Dave Nickerson.
Thank you, Patrice. All right, Grace, if we could get ahead to the executive summary slide. There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Nickerson. I lead the clinical quality management team at EMD Serono, and I have also been the topic lead for ICH E6 R3 in relation to the, from pharma, in relation to the development of the document. Thank you, Patrice, for doing a great setup, and thank you to Transcelerate for organizing this webinar. It's been really great to see the turnout and the level of interest in this important topic. And Rebecca and I are very excited to be here with you today to be able to help set the stage for today's session. Let's go to the next slide, please. So let's start out with the disclaimers. The views that Rebecca and I share will be our own. They don't necessarily represent those of pharma, FPA, either of our employers or the expert working group that we're both a member of. The next slide, please. And we can go beyond the disclaimer. So going through the agenda for today's intro session, we'll have a quick look at the various topics that we'll address. I'll be covering the background on the GCP renovation effort, and I'll also cover the structure of E6R3. I'll then hand it over to Rebecca, who will go over the scope of the R3 document, as well as highlight some of the other important points to consider as you're all reading and seeking to interpret the guideline. We can go to the next slide. Great. So we'll be using a few of the slides from the Step 4 presentation that the expert working group has prepared to support the adoption of the new and the updated guideline. This full Step 4 slide deck will be accessible on the ICH website. Next slide. There we go. All right, so no presentation like this would be complete without another disclaimer. So here we have one from ICH, which proclaims that these slides are the property of ICH and should not be misrepresented elsewhere. All right, next slide, please. And we can skip over. Let's go into the content. So first, to start out with the background. Now, ICH E6 was first rolled out in 1996, and it remained unchanged for 20 years until revision 2 was adopted in 2016. That version left most of the guideline intact, but it added new content that sought to encourage the adoption of improved and more efficient approaches to good clinical practice. At the time of its adoption, however, it was immediately recognized that R2 didn't go far enough to adapt this good clinical practice guideline to the needs of the rapidly evolving clinical research landscape. That realization led to the broader GCP renovation initiative that resulted in significant efforts to improve both ICH E8 and ICH E6. In both cases, seeking to evolve these important guidelines to emphasize being proactive, inclusive, risk-based, proportionate, and innovative. Next slide, please. All right, so let's take a moment to orient you to R3's new structure. We can go to the next slide. Sorry for the lag here. All right, so the guideline is composed of GCP principles and annexes that provide the basis for the appropriate interpretation and application of those principles. The principles which form the foundation of this structure on the screen are intended to be flexible, to apply across clinical trial types and settings, and to remain relevant as clinical research advances occur. The principles outlined in the guideline may be satisfied using different approaches and should be applied in a way that is fit for purpose for any given clinical trial. The current guideline includes Annex 1, which is intended to provide information on how the GCP principles can be appropriately applied to clinical trials, specifically focusing on interventional clinical trials of investigational products that are intended to be submitted to regulatory authorities. There are additional annexes that will be developed to respond to the needs of interested parties and to address the emerging innovations in clinical trial design and methods of conduct. Annex 2, which is currently undergoing public consultation, will address additional GCP considerations, focusing on examples of trials that incorporate decentralized elements, pragmatic elements, and/or real-world data. Now let's go to the next slide, please. I won't spend a lot of time here, but it's worth noting that there has been significant reorganization of the document, which has occurred, and an entirely new and important chapter on data governance, which applies to investigators and sponsors, has been added into the Good Clinical Practice Guideline. Additionally, sections on the IB, protocol, and trial master file, which are still included, but they're now moved to the back of the document as appendices. Additionally, the glossary has been moved to the back of the document as well. I thank you all very much for your attention at this point. I'd like to hand it over to Rebecca.
Thanks very much, Dave. So my name's Rebecca Stanbrook and I work for Novartis as GCP Strategic Lead, but I'm also the FP Topic Lead for ICH E6R3. So I've been working with Dave, this past 5.5 years. So you heard from Dave about the structure of the document and the background. Let's talk about the scope. So next slide, please. So Dave mentioned that it applies to interventional clinical trials of investigational products intended for submission to regulatory authorities. But when you look at the principles, they can also be applicable to other types of interventional clinical trials. So when you look at principle 1, it's about the Declaration of Helsinki. So, who wouldn't be applying the Declaration of Helsinki? But the other reason we wanted to clarify the scope was this problem we had where GCP training was being required or mandated by people who weren't conducting trials on investigational product and they weren't interventional in nature. So perhaps non-interventional studies. So that's where E8 comes in, and Tashan will be talking about that later. And when you look at the structure, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because we've got those overarching principles, which we really need to adhere to, and then the annexes are actually providing some basis for sort of the interpretation of those principles and how you might apply them in the clinical setting. So what you need to sort of think about is, these are the ways, if you follow these requirements, for a better term, of the Annex 1, then you should be able to conduct any type of interventional clinical trial on investigational product. However, there's always more than one way to crack a nut, isn't there? So there may be other ways of conducting your trial, still meeting with the spirit of the principles. So think about that, but think you need to justify that if you are making a change from how it is set out in Annex 1. And then, of course, Annex 2 is more about sort of these different types of trial designs that we might see, as Dave was mentioning. One of the things that came up as a problem with sort of E6 previously was about this proportionate approach, because you've got different types of clinical trial. So it might be sort of a first time that it's going into human, or it might be a well-established product that's been on the market for some years. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So it's really encouraging a risk-based and a proportionate approach to the conduct of the clinical trial. So the other thing we were trying to do was future-proof it. So we've talked about data acquisition tools. So rather than just saying about a clinical case report form, we talk about data acquisition tools, because we recognise that data is coming from a variety of places. And this was one of the questions that was coming up. So we're trying to sort of address some of the questions as we go through the presentations. Next slide, please. So the next slide talks about engagement, which is sort of moves on from the E8. Because when you talk about E8, one of the principles in E8 is about engagement of patients, healthcare professionals as well. But as I was mentioning, we wanted to sort of make sure we were future-proofing it. So we wanted to sort of say, think about the use of other technologies. But, when you think about them, make sure that you're not precluding the use of them in some patient populations. So that's why this slide talks about both the technology and about engagement inclusivity. So I always use my mum as an example. So she has a smartphone, and if you ask her to click on a link, she'll have a bit of a panic. But if she then knows that that link's bona fide, then she might be able to sort of find out more about a clinical trial that she might be wanting to be involved in. So she's been asked if she'd like to be involved in a trial. But if you then ask her to do additional things that are a little bit more tech savvy, so perhaps something of a different type of sensor that needs input in from the patient, she might have a problem. So would you want to exclude her from the clinical trial? So it's really trying to make sure that you're having that thought about technology, but you're thinking about the people who would be using that technology. And also you want to think about the complexity. So are we expecting the investigator to rub their stomach, tap their head, see this participant over here, then run them down to the MRI scanner? Is it feasible? So we're really trying to sort of think about feasibility, and we really want to make sure that we've got endpoints that are appropriate for those patient populations. So that's why it's really important to engage patients when you're thinking about running a clinical trial. But remember, it's not for every clinical trial. It's more at a development level that you might want to sort of consider engaging participants or potential participants and their healthcare professionals. Next slide, please. So we wanted to sort of leave you with some points to consider. So we'll move straight on to the next slide. So here we're talking about the design, the analysis, the conduct, the analysis and the reporting. So things to think about as you're running through your trial. So right from the design right through to the reporting. So once again, think about patient engagement and healthcare professional engagement to make sure you're developing a protocol that's fit for purpose. So I'm always saying to people, make sure you write a good protocol, including the right potential participants and thinking about how you can de-risk it as much as possible. So when I think about that, I think about quality by design. How do you build quality into the protocol? Well, you think about is the research question that I'm trying to answer. And then you think about, well, what do I need to answer that question? So what are the data points? So then you need to think about, well, actually, what are those critical to quality factors which might have an impact on participant safety or the reliability of the trial results? So, think about those risks to those factors. Then, of course, you're moving on to sort of the conduct. So think about feasibility, how the investigational product is controlled, the statistical analysis we've talked about in the protocol design. So we've included parts about bringing it up to more sort of current statistical methodology, and of course of that transparency of trial results. So at the end of the day, we want to sort of think about a proportionate approach to the conduct of the trial, right from the design to the reporting. So think about that all the way through. And I think this presentation today, this webinar with Transcelerate, and thank you very much for inviting us, is going to help with that implementation in your organisations. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Tashan, who will be talking about the importance of working with E8R1 and E6R3 working together. There's a reason they're both part of the GCP renovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. My name is Tashan Mistree from GSK, and I'm the co-lead for this work stream with Maddie Whitehead. From Rebecca and Dave, we got a flavor as to why ICH updated E6 and what drove the changes in this latest revision. Before we deep dive into ICH E6, I want to take us back to E8R1 and remind us how these two guidances work hand in hand and how the principles in E8 really inform how we implement E6. And for our Transcelerate workstream, the interpretation of clinical guidance and regulations has been, the goal has been to provide solutions and help address the challenges in operationalizing E8R1 and in E6R3. So when we started reviewing E8R1, it was in 2021. And we looked at the draft guidance then, relevant opinions, and guidances in regard to general considerations for clinical studies. We surveyed the Transcelerate member companies with regard to the challenges they face, and that really helped inform the topic areas that we would focus on for E8R1. The team then created a framework to clarify ICH E8R1 and the principles that were trying to be communicated through the guidances. And this framework helped develop the tools for E8 and helped our member companies embed and operationalize E8. This then led to the start of the solution development for E6R3. We reviewed the draft for public comment and understood the key changes and really focused on areas that we felt would aid our member companies in being able to understand the areas of change and areas that complemented the themes in E8 that we wanted to see carried through with our operationalizing of E6. And as a result, I'm really proud to say that we have 16 standalone ICH E6R3 solutions to offer you today. And we are going to take you through them in the later part of this webinar. Next slide, please. So I really love this infographic because I think it really shows the synergy and the togetherness of E6 and E8. And it illustrates how important the two are to be utilized together. So while E8 forms the foundation, which is why you see it at the bottom of this house diagram, and it provides those key elements of creating a fit-for-purpose trial with quality by design, reminds us of critical to quality factors that need to be considered, and reminds us to engage with our key stakeholders. E6, on the other hand, provides the roles and responsibilities for any key party, whether it's a sponsor, an investigator, an IRB, or a CRO involved in a clinical trial, to be able to operationalize the guidance. And so the two together really help create an environment where we are putting our participants, protection of our participants first, and we're ensuring that we have the integrity and reliability of our study data and study results. Next slide, please. And ultimately, going back to E8R1, it's an overarching guidance. It's that foundational guidance that helps to address the increasing complexities that we have in clinical trials. It talks to those principles of being fit for purpose right from the start, with stakeholder engagement, where you build in your quality by design and you are mindful of your critical to quality factors, with guidance on how changing our quality culture, having that open dialogue, utilizing critical thinking will allow us to protect our study participants and ensure the integrity and reliability of study data. So really, E8 gives us those ways of working that are so key at the start and throughout the life cycle of our trial. Next slide, please. And both guidances together are really complementary and compound their impact when used together to focus on robust processes for data integrity and patient safety. E8 stresses the need for stakeholder involvement in clinical trials and drives operational efficiency through innovation and technological advancements. E6 focuses on GCP, emphasizing the risk proportionate approach and ensuring quality management throughout the trial lifecycle. So together, they really ensure clinical trials are well established. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Maddie for a deep dive into our E6 solutions.
Thank you so much, Tashan. Hello, I'm Maddie Whitehead from Roche. I have the privilege of being the co-workstream lead for this fantastic Transcelerate working group with Tashan. So now we're going to take a deeper dive into what's new in ICH and to have a look at the Transcelerate tools we've been working so hard to create. Next slide, please. As we've heard from Tashan and Rebecca and Dave, ICH E6R3 builds on the concepts which were outlined in ICH E8, operationalizing the concepts of fit for purpose and proportionality, promoting quality by design approaches, proactively creating a study that is fit for purpose and takes a proportionate approach, addressing the question in a non-burdensome way for our participants and collects the data that is necessary. Key across GCP is the identification and protection of factors which are critical to the quality of the trial. Ensuring what is critical is proportionally protected and control strategies that are commensurate with the level of the risk. The language used in ICH E6R3 facilitates innovation, which will undoubtedly continue within our industry. It's aiming for sustainability of the guidance. Language that allows the use of decentralized elements, which are more and more important as we run clinical trials today. And it meets that changing environment of the standard of care and our participant populations. The use of digital technologies and innovations to capture data happens at such a rate that we need to make sure that we can keep up and analyze results and information facilitated through those multiple approaches and technologies. ICH E6R3 sets the foundation for practical expectations of responsibilities between the investigator and the sponsor in the digital environment. Next slide, please. With the scale of the change that we've seen in ICH E6R3, the working group followed ICH's lead and took a proportionate approach and selected a number of focus areas for the work to take place. The areas of focus were chosen based on input from member companies on areas perceived with the most ambiguity, areas that were new, or where we thought we could offer additional support and benefit. For example, data governance section is entirely new and an area that we are able to offer a huge amount of benefit and value through the tools for the industry. We have been able to, as you can see in this slide, build tools that create and that build on what we created in ICH E8, again following ICH's lead. We were really mindful to add value to the industry, not to duplicate where there are already great and significant number of tools available. As you can see from this slide, we selected risk proportionality, monitoring, investigator, trial design, risk management, and data governance. Risk management and data governance were incredible collaborations with ACRO, so we were very lucky and very excited to work with our colleagues from ACRO. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our tools span the clinical trial life cycle, and as you can see this from this fantastic infographic, we go from clinical trial planning and preparation all the way through execution and data collection. The infographic is highlighting when each of the tools from the focus areas are applicable and where you can find them in the life cycle for clinical trial execution. It's a really useful way to navigate all the fantastic tools, as Tashan was talking about earlier, that we have in our menu for you today. Next slide, please. We're now going to review each of our toolkits, highlighting the value of the tools with a brief description of each. You can see a teaser shot on the screen for each of those tools, and hopefully it'll make you want to go in and explore our tools even further. On the screen, you can see our risk proportionality framework, which is an interactive PowerPoint which provides examples for the critical to quality factors and the potential elements of a proportionate risk-based approach, as outlined in ICH E6R3. The framework aims to support the understanding of a risk-based and proportionate approach. For each CTQ, the tool provides information on that risk-based approach for trial design with examples of key stakeholders, considerations to manage, minimize, or accept the risk, and really importantly, the value and potential benefits of using that risk proportionate approach. In the framework, you will also find really useful links to other tools and resources to help implement the tool successfully. Next slide, please. Thank you. The trial design starter kit. As you can see, there's a lot of detail on the screen, so please, there is a QR code and these slides will be coming out. The trial design starter kit fosters critical thinking for robust and compliant trials, aiding GCP stakeholders in the management of ICH E6R3 requirements, supporting quality by design and a risk-based approach. It supports a transition to a proactive quality culture, guiding stakeholders through risk assessment and emphasizing early risk identification and mitigation. Trial design use case scenarios can be found in the starter kit. The objective of this deliverable is to demonstrate ICH E6R3 concepts in trial design and to encourage thoughtful consideration and planning to design fit-for-purpose clinical trials that are scientifically sound for their intended purpose. The trial design startup kit considerations tool, which is currently out for public comment, integrates areas of consideration in early trial planning for quality by design, including risk proportionality, critical to quality factors, control measures and data governance, and operational feasibility and monitoring. So really a fantastic one-stop shop. I'm really delighted to be handing over to Arlene Lee, who will take you through a deeper dive on more of our tools. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Maddie. My name is Arlene Lee, and I'm a part of Medidata's Data Quality and Risk Management Solutions team. Today, I'm here representing ACRO. ACRO and Transcelerate have been formally collaborating since 2015. Subject matter experts from both organizations meet regularly to exchange insights and contribute to projects together. So after the release of the May 2023 draft ICH E6 R3 guidelines, ACRO and Transcelerate established two work streams. One was focused on risk management, and a second one was focused on data governance. The two sub-teams co-developed adoption tools to support industry implementation of the finalized guidelines, and we'll be reviewing those together today. So a little warning, these next two slides are packed with information, and they do provide a sneak peek at these amazing tools that are available. You do see the QR code there that you can scan, and we can't wait for you to dive in and explore them further. So let's begin by walking through the Risk Management Toolkit. In early 2024, we developed a 3-page infographic comparing key risk management changes between ICH E6 R2 and the May 2023 draft of R3. This visual comparison helps the industry assess process impacts and adapt for more efficient E6 R3 implementation. It is currently being reviewed to ensure alignment with the final release of E6 R3 in January. Next, the Acceptable Ranges for Clinical Trial Solutions tool was created. This supports a company's internal development and implementation of acceptable ranges under the E6 R3 guidelines. Both E6 R2 and R3 emphasize the importance of a risk-based quality management approach, while R2 introduced quality tolerance limits, or QTLs, to identify systemic issues that could impact participant safety or reliability of trial results. R3 reframes these as acceptable ranges and focuses on assessing control over risks that may impact critical to quality factors. Unlike QTLs, acceptable ranges are more flexible, and they enable a risk proportionate approach, provided that, again, participant safety and trial validity are maintained. The tool dives into the introduction of acceptable ranges and comparison to E6R2, provides implementation support, and also highlights a potential use case. Lastly, the Control Strategies Considerations tool was developed and released in mid-2024. Created to support the implementation of control strategies under R3, this was the May 2023 draft guidelines. It is also undergoing review against the final version. Application of control strategies in clinical trials ensures protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of participants and enhances the reliability of study results by managing the occurrence and impact of risks associated with those critical to quality factors. Implementation begins with trial design and continues throughout the study conduct. Together, this risk management toolkit offers resources to help proactively identify implementation challenges with E6R3 and integrates risk management with ICH E8R1 principles, including quality by design and risk proportionate mitigation, to ensure the integrity of those critical to quality factors. So ACRO and Transcelerate further collaborated to develop solutions supporting the new ICH E6 R3 data governance section. So although E6 R3 introduces this new dedicated data governance section, key elements such as data handling and integrity were already present in R2 within sections such as record keeping and computerized systems. However, this new Data Governance Section 4 guides investigators and sponsors on ensuring data integrity, traceability, and security to improve the accuracy and reliability of clinical trial information. It complements responsibilities outlined in E6R3, Sections 2 and 3, as well as E8R1, E9, and E9R1. The Data Governance Toolkit, co-developed, provides valuable resources, including adoption tools, frameworks, and templates, and it's created to guide the GCP stakeholders in navigating compliance, data quality, and decision-making challenges. It also enables them to design flexible and efficient systems that meet the demands of the ever-evolving clinical research landscape. So let's begin with the Data Governance Framework. This practical tool outlines key components of a data governance framework, along with controls and resources, and connects the other Transcelerate ACRO data governance solutions to help the stakeholders develop their own fit-for-purpose data governance framework. Next up is the new data flow template. This template was designed to help companies map out relevant data flows between all of the various data collection tools, such as EDC, ePro, or Central Labs, for example, and involve stakeholders such as the sponsor, CRO, and third-party vendors in a study. The objective of the tool is to increase clarity and coordination amongst all parties involved. By proactively reviewing the data flow and data systems, early risk detection and even system optimization may be achieved. The Safeguarding Blinding Considerations tool was also co-developed. The Safeguard Blinding section within data governance stresses the need for careful planning and management of data access to protect the integrity of blinded trials and to ensure the reliability of those trial results. So the objective of this tool is to help explain the concept of safeguarding blinding in clinical research and covers topics such as what is blinded data, why is data blinded, the importance of maintaining blinding, who may be unblinded, and the steps to take in case of unblinding. Okay, almost done. Let's move on to the data lifecycle framework. The Data Lifecycle Elements section discusses the expectations around data capture, review of data, and metadata, including audit trails, data collection, and finalization of data for analyses. This tool provides considerations that may help support better understanding of how data is moved and used during a clinical trial, as well as to facilitate accurate reporting, verification, and interpretation of clinical trial data, which is critical to support the reliability of trial results and protection of participants. Please note this tool is currently accepting public comment through the end of March. To support the computerized systems section under data governance, a new technology framework tool was created. This explains the computerized systems requirements outlined in E6R3. Key elements of using computerized systems are covered, including training, security, validation, and much more. It also features Transcelerate and ACRO's proposed definitions and outlines potential roles and responsibilities, thus providing a comprehensive guide for organizations to utilize. And lastly, a new data matrix template was co-developed. This template offers a valuable tool for companies to define their data management processes, including data provenance, collection, transformation, review, and analysis. It facilitates compliance with R3 by providing that structured format for outlining these key elements and promoting a clear understanding of the data governance requirements. These 6 solutions were developed by industry experts from ACRO and Transcelerate to facilitate the adoption of the new data governance section, and we hope that you find them to be useful. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Shilpa.
Thank you, Arlene. Hi, everyone. My name is Shilpa Lewandowski from AstraZeneca. So we have 2 more toolkits to review before we get to the example, which I know everyone is waiting for. So the ICH E6R3 Annex 1 Section 2 focuses on the responsibilities and expectations of investigators in the clinical trial. Annex 1, Section 2 emphasizes the critical role of investigators in ensuring the integrity, safety, and ethical conduct of clinical trial. Transcelerate developed a tool to provide support to investigators, sites, and other interested parties to understand the changes in responsibilities outlined in ICH E6R3 compared to ICH E6R2. To help, we have developed a GCP summary of changes relating to investigational site, which is a tool that provides a summary of changes comparing updates to investigators' roles and responsibility from GCP version 2 to 3. The document allows interested parties to explore changes to different topics relating to investigators, as well as understanding if section changes are new or updated in the guidance. Next slide, please. Last but not least is the monitoring toolkit. This is a set of solutions that aims to support the industry in implementing monitoring strategies that are proportionate to the risk of clinical trial. These solutions reflect both ICH E8R1 and ICH E6R3 guidance. The whole monitoring, like the key quality control activity, should not be seen as one size fits all clinical trial. So the monitoring toolkit reflects the following principles of ICH E8R1 and ICH E6R3 guidance. First, the extent and the nature of trial monitoring, it should be tailored to the specific trial design and objectives and the need to ensure participants' safety and data reliability. And second, the monitoring strategy should be customized to include a broad range of activities and technology. The document aids sponsors in developing a monitoring strategy that is both flexible and responsive to changes identified through continuous risk reassessments. The toolkit supports integrated risk-based monitoring in clinical trial. So we have a template of documenting monitoring approach. It provides a customized template for documenting the monitoring approaches that a company defines for trial based on risk-based approach. This template will support the development of monitoring strategies based on ICH principles. With that, I'll hand it over to Maddie again.
Thank you, Shilpa. Next slide, please. In fact, can we just go one more? Is that all right? Thank you. So we realise we've just shared a great deal of information. There's lots in our slides, so we're looking forward to sharing those with you. We'd really like now to give you some examples to make the information and the tools real. You can begin to see those in action. We're going to discuss the design of a study so you can see our tools in action. It's a phase 3 clinical trial. The example is a double-blind, multi-centered trial with 500 participants. The primary endpoint is the progress-free survival assessed by blinded independent central review using imaging. So there's lots of detail on here that goes into a lot more, but this is the high level of the example you're going to see us walk through. Next slide, please. So we're going to walk you through the example so we can see the tools that we've just spoken about and how they might be used in the design of the trial, utilising one of the case studies you'll find in our trial design kit, and use that scenario. The scenario is going to focus on risk identification and mitigation using a sample of CTQs. All the tools are hyperlinked, so that will really help and support the navigation as you move between the different tools. So I'm handing back to the amazing Shilpa, who will walk you through.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Next slide, please, Grace. It's a busy one. I will try to navigate the CTQs in action with some sample or case examples. I would try to familiarize you with this busy slide. So we have a sample CTQ, sample risk, and some associated information around it. Let's say, for example, eligible participants are randomized into the study. This is a CTQ. The sample risk could be definition of disease and its molecular characteristic may be changing or challenging. There could be detailed risk around variation, around molecular characteristic of the disease, around randomization, around visibility of the molecular characteristic, etc. And then we have to score our risk to high or medium, and there could be detailed mitigation plan. This is just sample situation, a case situation. Grace, if you could please hit a button for me. So the first transcelerate the lag is not helping. If you can press, please. Yeah, exactly. So the first transcelerate tool I want to highlight is the trial design startup tool, which serves in applying critical thinking, knowledge maintenance, and quality by design mindset at the onset of trial design. It should be used early in the design process. One more hit, Grace. Next important tool is the GCP summary of changes relating to investigational site. Grace, one more. Yeah, it's here. Perfect. So this tool supports informing interested parties of changing all the changes in the site responsibilities from R2 to R3. So in this situation, understanding changes in GCP and the impact on trial processes is important in defining your CTQs. So it's really important. What are the changes from R2 to R3? One more hit, please. Next is the risk proportionality. I'll wait for it. Yeah, exactly. So the risk proportionality framework supports the critical thinking of the risk details through evaluation of the trial design characteristic. Risk needs to be understood to effectively design the trial and stakeholder feedback. So always think about the ICH E8R1. It's really crucial to understand and control the risk of the trial. Next, the control strategies tool. Yeah, the control strategies tool has been created in collaboration with ACRO. It supports the critical thinking to predefine appropriate mitigations to risk associated to the CTQ. So this analysis should be documented clearly. One more hit. In this particular example, we see that bias is a risk, so unblinding will be used. The safeguarding blinding consideration tool aids in the understanding of who, what, why, when, and how to safeguard the study blind from startup to reporting. We will now shift to the monitoring example, and I'll hand it over to Tashan. Thank you.
Thank you, Shilpa. I just wanted to take a moment to remind the audience of our use case scenario, because as we step through this example, it's important to think of these different elements. So as Maddie told us, we're talking about a pivotal oncology trial. It's a phase 3 double-blind multi-center trial with 500 trial participants across 14 countries and 150 sites. With a year and a half of recruitment and a 3-year primary readout with a 5-year final overall survival follow-up. So specifically for monitoring, you can see why this is a good example. And we're focusing on the monitoring strategy within this example. So if you look along the slide, you can see with regard to the primary endpoint and the data that is being collected on site, one element of the monitoring strategy to consider is on-site monitoring, where you would use SDV, source data verification, to check the data because the critical primary endpoint data is not collected in the ECRFs and comes from the imaging. For the secondary endpoint, a remote monitoring review could be used and is required for the tumor assessment data to ensure its completion. And one can check that the tumor assessment data is complete, and this can be achieved through remote monitoring and a review of critical data to ensure continuation of the scans and timely transfers to avoid progression-free survival censoring. Central monitoring can be another strategy to support the primary endpoint data, and a review of the aggregated data from sites and countries as well can be possible through central monitoring. So next, please. In this example, we can see how we use the data governance framework that we talked of earlier in the webinar. This provides some possible approaches for compliance with ICH E6R3 with the new data governance section. You can apply the data governance framework to determine possible approaches, and this tool was developed in conjunction with ACRO. And the framework provides you a way to think of your data and use it to aid in data related to decision making, which, if you think from the perspective of a monitor, you need to have that oversight of the data to verify and to ensure that the data can be trusted and maintains its integrity. So the framework really provides good approaches or possible approaches so that you are able to comply with ICH E6. Next slide, please. In this example, we are showcasing the use of the safeguarding blinding considerations tool. Endpoint data, again, is a consideration, and blinding should always be maintained. And as a monitor, we understand the importance of that. So this tool allows one, when you're monitoring, to think about the who, the what, the why, and the when to safeguard the blind, and the how as well, from startup to reporting, and then even in the decision making. And in doing so, even remote or centralized monitoring help maintaining the blind is imperative to the integrity of the trial there, and therefore safeguarding blinding considerations will help understand what we need to do while we are in the monitoring components and activities as well. Next slide, please. Did it switch over? Thank you. For this example, we are looking at the technology framework tool, and this clarifies the requirements within E6 for computerized systems and helps to support the understanding of the roles and responsibilities of those involved in the trial from a technology and computer systems perspective. And it also helps clarify requirements of the system. So when reviewing data through central monitoring for our technology framework tool, you're able to see at different points of your data collection as well as your systems, the roles and responsibilities that are impacted and therefore are integral to that part of your centralized monitoring. Next slide, please. In this example, we know that some data is not collected in the ECRF. Therefore, the awareness of your data flow and the location of that data is important. And the two tools that could help in that is the study data flow template and the data matrix template that help meet those ICH E6 requirements. So you can use the study data flow template because it helps to establish the flow of data and systems for all parties involved through the trial and the need to map this out at different trial points. And the data matrix template can help the monitor and the trial team to understand data provenance, collection methods, and data transformation. So all along the life cycle of the trial, again, you're looking for those data points, you're looking for those trial points, collection methods, the provenance of your data, and how it flows between the different milestones within your trial. Next slide, please. And I believe this is our last part of this example. Don't know if it's switched over, but here we have the acceptable ranges tool that can be used to help establish thresholds on assessing the state of risk in regards to the impact on critical to quality factors. So another very useful tool that can be utilized at different points of data collection as well. Next slide, please. So I think this brings us to the end of our use case examples, showcasing our different tools. We hope that you've gained some understanding of what we are bringing you through these solutions and tools. This work would not be possible without the support and the expertise and time given by the many members of our work stream. And Maddie and I had the pleasure of leading this team, but really it is the work and time and effort of the members that you see on this slide that have enabled these tools to be brought to life. And we hope that they will be beneficial in your implementation of E6 R3. With that, I'd like to thank everyone, and I think, Patrice, we go to questions next.
Yes, we do. Now it's time for the fun part where we get to hear from you. And I think you saw earlier, we are taking questions. There is a little question mark button. You can go to the next slide, Grace, thanks. There's a little question mark button with a little call out on your screen. If you can click on that to ask any questions that you may have. We may not get to all of the questions. We will look at all of the questions that have been submitted previously, as well as those come in today, and decide whether or not we need to do more that our tools are not maybe answering some of the questions that are out there. So I just want to, again, if we can, give a first round of applause, right, to all of the speakers. They did a really amazing job, and it was such a pleasure to be able to work with them. My first question is, what would be the challenges for industry implementation and any advice if an organization has a robust model for RBQM aligned to R2? What do you see as the most significant change or changes that the E6R3 would impact? Tashan, any thoughts?
Sure, Patrice, I'll start us off. So I think it is important to really review your internal processes, look at your ways of working, potentially conduct a gap analysis, and then you can utilize the tools to help see where you want to embed the guidances, where you need to change your ways of working. To me, really, the principles, in essence, have not really changed from R2 to R3. It's just we have a better defined framework, and therefore you're able to really put into perspective what you're trying to achieve through your internal processes and your ways of working while utilizing E6R3 in the new revision.
Thanks. Arlene, any questions? Same question related to the, the ACRO membership. Any different points of view on that?
Yeah, so I certainly echo what Tashan said. I think the industry really does need to embrace the RBQM methodology and the mindset shift from transitioning away from that 100% SDV and embracing centralized monitoring. By building in the quality by design concept that was introduced in E8, E6R3 really emphasizes that more proactive and flexible approach, really from startup through conduct, really with that focus on the critical to quality factors. By doing that, this allows the organizations to concentrate their efforts on the most essential aspects of a trial and really ensuring efficient resource allocation rather than spending efforts, on less critical areas. As far as advice, I would encourage everyone to continue to engage with industry groups and workshops like today's webinar. It's a great way to learn from others' experiences and best practices. Along with the tools that we discussed today, there is a comprehensive landscape paper that provides insights from a 5-year study on centralized monitoring. It's available on the ACRO website under the RBQM section and outlines some key strategies for implementation. Lastly, I would say shifting from R2 to R3 does require a bit of investigation, as Tashan mentioned. Really following along with the fit for purpose approach, the emphasis on the critical to quality factors. There's also a need to reframe the concept of quality tolerance limits with acceptable ranges as a next step. So again, while they were introduced in R2, E6 reframes those to a more broader, flexible, acceptable range concept. And then lastly, really trying to understand the new data governance section, I think is important to establish really that robust data management process and systems. And it's exciting because, they're really embracing new technologies that are being offered by vendors in this more complex clinical trial landscape.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Anything else to add, Rebecca or Dave?
I think it's all been said, really. The only thing I would say is think. So it's always one of my messages that I like to bring into any presentation about E6R3. It's about thinking. What's right for the participant, their right safety and well-being, what's right for the reliability of the trial results.
Awesome.
Agree. Totally agree with Rebecca's addition there. The changes that have been embedded into E6R3 provide us with the opportunity to ensure that we're embedding quality into our clinical trials from the very beginning and focusing our oversight, effort, energy, resources on those aspects of the clinical trials that really matter most from a patient safety and data reliability point of view. But there's no computerized system that will do that for us. There's no tool that will do that for us. It really involves engaging the cross-functional study teams in a very thoughtful and proactive way to ensure that we're building quality and driving quality from an end-to-end process into our clinical trials.
Awesome. Thanks so much. What are the quantitative benefits of applying ICHE6R3 and stories you would tell to move people's hearts and minds to have them adopt RBQM effectively? Maddie, can we start with you?
Absolutely. I think that we are at a real moment, especially for RBQM, where this risk proportionate approach allows us to really be mindful of what is critical to the outcome of the study and to take that risk-based approach. I'm in the RBQM team here at Roche, and I think one of the things that I say to teams is it allows you to take some of the noise out of this data and the constant data collection and being complex, and to really give your mind and your attention and critical thinking to what is critical for the study. I think ICHE6R3 really allows us to think. I think I've heard both Dave and Rebecca call it the thinking person's revision, and I take that to heart. I say it all the time because I really think this is our opportunity to move away from one size fits all to thinking about what's in front of us and how do we protect it and how do we design to get great medicines to patients and to society in a way that is risk proportionate.
Thanks, Maddie.
Thank
Arlene,
you.
any thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to add from my own personal experience, I feel like the RBQM methodology really became more fully embraced by the industry during the COVID shutdown and COVID vaccine development period. Since so many sites were closed at various times, organizations were somewhat forced to engage with the centralized monitoring teams. But by proactively monitoring those emergent trends and being able to quickly react, we really ensured trial success with a high degree of compliance, with those key endpoint data. And that was really critical in obtaining that regulatory approval so quickly. I would say it's also imperative to utilize centralized monitoring on fast enrolling studies that are screening a large number of participants daily. Without it, it would have been really difficult to ensure like the early issue detection by utilizing those more traditional methods. And I would say as far as accurately measuring, I think continuing to monitor KPIs, such as number of protocol deviations and significant PDs, time to resolve issues, data query trends, et cetera. I think that you'll see the optimization of those KPIs with the new guidelines.
Thank you. All right, next question. Dave, we're going to send this to you. Is there an expectation that this update enhances the effectiveness of GCP compliance? And should there be metrics for improved overall participant protection or reliability of results?
A good question. I would say that there is not an expectation around compliance, but there is an expectation related to quality, and those are two different things. Placing a very heavy emphasis, as R3 does, on the concepts of building quality into our clinical study protocols proactively by gathering input from the relevant interested parties, such as sites and potential participants, and focusing on the aspects of each clinical trial that are truly critical in the context of patient safety and data reliability gives us that opportunity to prevent important risks before they ever occur during the clinical trial. That in and of itself, I think, represents a significant opportunity to improve the quality of our trials. You can frame that as compliance as well, compliance with a protocol, sure, but the overall outcome is seeking to drive improvements in patient safety and data reliability. By applying this QBD framework, we have the opportunity, right? And it's an opportunity to improve the operational feasibility of our trials in the context of how they're being designed, the data acquisition tools that we're using and the way that they are being set up to collect our data, the systems, the uses of different technology, digital health technologies, where they're being selected, where they're not being selected, and how they're being utilized during the trial, as well as all of the associated processes. Are they well designed, fit for purpose, and proportionate to meet the specific objectives that are intended. Again, focusing on those aspects that are critical to quality. If I were to be pushed into a corner and asked, how could we potentially be measuring the impact, right, in a specific KPI, KQI type of point of view, I would be personally, okay, speaking for Dave, seeking to measure reductions in quality issues, reductions in important protocol deviations, and reductions in avoidable protocol amendments. There may be many others that folks can come up with, but that would be a starting point for myself.
Thanks, Dave. Okay. Tashan, I'm going to send this to you. Do you have any experience you can share on how this practically can be communicated and implemented? For example, get people on board with critical thinking and find a balance when we're documenting CTQs in a practical way that we can use for the whole trial.
So selfishly, I'm going to take it back to the E8R1 tools. We have a fabulous critical to quality factor framework tool. And I think the great part of that tool is it shows you how to implement and think of your critical to quality factors, not just at a study level throughout the life cycle of a trial, but also through the development of an asset or a molecule. So thinking along the way, looking at the different risks that you can identify, and then how you can implement mitigations for those as well. So it's a really great tool that we already have available. Again, you can see the linkage between what we practically need to do from an E6 GCP perspective, but then embedded in the principles of E8 as well.
Awesome, awesome. Any of the other panelists have anything to comment on that? If not, we have a lot of other questions. Shilpa, we're going to send this one to you. Is the monitoring approach template equivalent to the monitoring plan?
The short answer is yes. It is a sample template approach. Here is a disclaimer text from the document that further explains that this document can function as a standalone summary of the overall integrated risk-based monitoring approach for a trial, or its contents can be integrated into existing documentation such as trial monitoring plan or integrated quality risk management plan. Thank you for the question.
Awesome. All right, Dave, going to send this one to you now. We're back in the live questions. Am I right in understanding that the site monitoring has not changed much in R3? The changes are in centralized monitoring, the strategy, but the expectations towards the field work and or remote or on-site remain the same.
I would say that you're correct, right? There are no dramatic changes in the context of what monitoring approaches are being implied from R2 to R3. But I would say that R3 does go further to place a much heavier emphasis that monitoring is not a cookie cutter approach. There is nothing within E6R3 that specifies that any particular individual or combination thereof type of monitoring needs to be followed. What is emphasized, however, is that the monitoring strategy that is deployed for any given clinical trial needs to be designed such that it is best suited to ensure that there's appropriate and proper oversight of those factors that are critical to quality for that study, and to ensure that the oversight is focusing on maintaining control of those areas of risk that are most significant and most likely to have an important impact on those different critical to quality factors. There's a lot of options there. There's various combinations of on-site, off-site, and centralized monitoring, and no one size is intended to fit all.
Thanks, Dave. Rebecca, for you, are the guidance and toolkits transferable to device studies? And can you please provide any tips on this or where to focus? And I don't know if this was discussed in the expert working group or not.
Thank you. It's a good question, and it was something that was a clear thought that it wasn't applicable to devices. So when you look at the scope, it's for investigational product, clinical trials with an interventional nature. So devices are excluded from that. But I do wonder, to our other panelists, about the applicability of using some of the tools, because often it's about common sense, isn't it? And so that I would suspect that some of the tools would approach any sort of device studies with a common sense approach. So I turn it over to my other panelists to perhaps make a comment, please.
Yeah, I would definitely say the data governance tools would be applicable. Obviously, reviewing the computerized systems, thinking about the data flow, that really crosses all types of, different types of trials.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on. Tashan, this one is coming to you. Where do you see the largest gaps in industry's implementation of ICH GCP E6R3? Which of the tools presented today do you believe will be used most frequently? I don't know, it's just going to vary, but what do you think, Tashan?
So I would say the largest gap, and this is a hard one, I think, is that mind shift, as Arlene also spoke about earlier, to engage early, to build quality, drive quality into our trials and the development process versus using that checklist approach. So you no longer want to go in and see someone monitoring using a monitoring checklist and, just tick the boxes. There has to be that critical thinking. And there has to be an understanding of the proportionate approach, the risk proportionate approach as well. So I think that to me is really the biggest challenge or gap that I see, is changing that mindset and changing the culture to be able to truly embed this GCP renovation. And from a tool perspective, obviously, I hope all the tools will be used because we spend so much time and effort in developing these solutions. And I think there are so many focus areas that apply to different roles and responsibilities within the clinical trial process. So I think there can be great use of all the tools. But I think data governance, being the hot new section, probably will have the most usage, though the principles have always been there. I think the solutions really provide a wide range of tools that can be utilized throughout the clinical trial lifecycle.
Thanks, Tashan. All right, I'm going to send the next one to Dave, but also open it up to any of the panelists who have a perspective on this. How to define risks, and do they always vary from protocol to protocol?
I think Webster's would define risk something along the lines of the impact of uncertainty. I also would think of risk as being associated with opportunities for error, and absolutely not, right? The risks for any one given clinical trial should by nature be different in the context or in relation to other trials. Now, with that said, there may be, if you're studying a particular patient population with similar safety risks and similar primary and key secondary endpoints from trial to trial, with similar operational designs, you can expect that there will be some similarity of the risks from one trial to another. But most importantly is that we need to ensure that we're not trying to apply cookie cutter approaches from trial to trial. We need to be thoughtful, focusing on those CTQs and trying to critically evaluate where the trial could go sideways and have an important impact on those areas.
Anyone else have a perspective?
Unsurprisingly, I have a little perspective. I totally agree. We need to move away from the cookie cutter approach and think about the protocol that's in front of you. There may be, if you're on a molecule, there may be some standard activities you want to do to control the risk on that molecule. But I think taking the protocol that's in front of you and working out its risk profile and what needs to be to protect what is critical to quality in that protocol is essential. And I think it goes back to Tashan's piece around that mindset shift that we're really, advocating here and really speaking about. That is part of that mindset shift. And I think by looking at the protocol in front of you individually, that helps, it builds up those muscles that you need to really, that this becomes part of our DNA rather than, really hard. It's just something that we do, like squatting.
Awesome.
And I would add, this is the one aspect of RBQM that the industry seems to have embraced. Most studies now have the risk assessment, at the beginning of the trial, and then it's also very important to continue to do that frequently throughout the trial. Again, focusing on, critical data, critical processes. So a lot of the same concepts from R2, but really just expanding upon the risk proportionate piece of that.
Totally agree. And the mindset shift, I think some things are not really literally there in the process, and how to change your thinking and the whole from design to conduct analysis and reporting. So the whole proportionate approach, and not everything is important, not everything is critical. So really thinking from critical to quality and quality by design, which has been the approach in the industry, as Arlene, you're saying from the start of the study, but it's a lot about the mindset. And I advocate all the Transliterate tools in the example of the CTQ example. So I really hope the industry can adapt and use as much as possible.
Awesome. There's another question that came through in the chat, and I'm going to ask, potentially, we haven't heard from Rebecca in a little while. Are there any suggestions for companies on how to demonstrate their risk-based thinking, thinking about obviously implementation and auditing and inspecting? And if there was any sort of thinking in the working group, and then I'm going to ask potentially maybe Tashan from the tool perspective. Maybe Tashan and Maddie can chime in about, do any of our tools help with this?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because we often get the question, well, what's the inspector going to say about this? What's the auditor going to say about this? My answers are always about how do you demonstrate the story of the clinical trial? So your risk assessment is part of that story. So it needs to hang together. So you need to document it somewhere. What are the thought processes behind it? And I always say, if you can't understand the story, it looks like there's a few pages missing from it, then you're not fully demonstrating how and why you've done what you've done. So there are various tools that would be available to support this, I'm sure, from the Transliterate toolkit, but certainly think about the clinical trial as a story.
So from our tools, we have a large number of risk management and risk proportionality tools that I think can really benefit this challenge. And I think the control strategies, as well as the acceptable ranges, is a good one to look at. The infographics help or the consideration tools help in looking through the different scenarios that you may have, and specifically within the clinical trial setting as to how you can tell the story of your risk mitigation as well. So I think it's important to have that information considerate from the start and be able to show how you've evolved through the process as well.
Anyone else have a different perspective or anything to add from the panel? It's a really tough question. Okay. We did have one that I want to make sure that we had two questions come in that I'm actually going to take. Even though I'm not an expert in GCP compliance, I am an expert in Transliterate. And I just want to remind everyone that whether or not you are a Transliterate member, you can use these tools. And we did have a question come up about AI, and AI comes up a lot. in many, many different perspectives. And we're not necessarily going to address it as it relates to our tools today because we didn't really, include it as a consideration. But I can point you to some other work within Transcelerate, the intelligent opportunities in automation. They actually have a validation framework that we can look at to be able to help you thinking along the journey about what's important when you're thinking about AI and those types of solutions. So anyone thinking about artificial intelligence should go to those solutions and take a look, because while they are related to pharmacovigilance, they are applicable in other areas as well. All right. We are coming to the end of our time here, and we want to thank everyone for hanging in with us and sharing our tools. We will be sharing the slides afterwards. Many of the slides that are in the deck that you will see are hyperlinked. There is one particular slide that takes you across the clinical trial continuum with all of the tools listed and the toolkits. They are all hyperlinked to help you navigate around the website and to know exactly how and where those tools are and how they all fit in. Grace, if you can go to the next slide. We would like to hear from you before we leave and take a poll. You gave us some information in the beginning about where you were on the continuum with your E6 understanding. Now what we'd like to know is, given where you were before the webinar started, have you advanced your understanding? And you can answer as many as you want. So this is looking really good for us, and we really, really tried to make sure that the work that the team was doing was going to be beneficial to the ecosystem, not just to Transcelerate members. So thank you for your inputs to this poll. I think we definitely think that folks will be exploring the tools. I'm glad that you've learned something new, and I think that I'm glad that you feel more prepared to be able to manage through the changes. And if it didn't help you, you're probably an expert, and we can sign you up for the next round that we will be employing. I want to thank our panelists again for joining us today, for all the hard work that everyone has put into this. And with that, I'm going to end the webinar and say thank you, everyone.